This computer.
So far, it's going smoothly. Fingers crossed. All right. Our first, our presenters, there's Dr. Stan Garrett. He's a professor of wildlife ecology at The Ohio State University and chair of the Center for Wildlife Research at the Max McGraw Wildlife Foundation. His research program focuses on various aspects of mammalian ecology, especially urban systems and dynamics of wildlife disease and human carnivore conflicts. He is principal investigator of a 20-plus year study of coyotes in the Chicago area, which has involved the capture and monitoring of over 1,600 individual coyotes. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed publications, and his books include the recently published Coyotes Among Us, Flashpoint Books, and the volume Urban Carnivores, published in 2010 by Johns Hopkins University Press. His research has been featured in numerous print, radio, and television outlets, including PBS, ABC, Nightline, NBC Nightly News, National Geographic, and the History Channel. Wow. Carrie Loof is Executive Vice President of the Max McGraw Wildlife Foundation. In that role, he oversees the foundation's conservation programs, including research and public policy analysis. He previously spent nearly 3 decades in journalism, mostly at the Chicago Tribune, where he specialized in national and foreign news. He has a bachelor's degree in journalism from Northwestern University. In this presentation, they will discuss our findings on how coyotes live among millions of people, how they move across the landscape while avoiding us, how they interact with each other, and how they function as predator in the urban ecosystem. So whoever wants to start first, take it away.
All right, thank you. So Carrie, I'll just jump in when you feel that, when you feel the urge. So feel free to interrupt. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna share my screen. So let me try and do that. One second. Let's see. I had it a second ago, and now I can't find it. Where's my share screen?
Is it screen sharing that you're looking for, or what you need to share?
Yeah.
Try the 3 little dots where it says more over towards the right at the bottom.
Thank you. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you able to see the screen?
No. No.
No.
Not yet.
There you go. There, it's on. Okay.
Got it.
Good.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first of all, I apologize for not being there in person. I didn't realize you were in Spring Valley Nature Center. I was actually over in Poplar Creek and Crabtree earlier today, where this is the time that we're going into dens. And so we were busy doing that. I'm going to actually share with you a couple of fresh slides taken just from today and yesterday on a couple of really cool coyotes. But as some of you may know, they're over by Spring Valley. That's been an incredibly important area and a partner for this project that forms the basis for this book, Coyotes Among Us. So we began a study of coyotes in the Chicago region back in 2000. This is in response to a lot of questions, complaints, or concern, mainly among people as coyotes began to appear in areas where they had not been seen before. And so we began in this area, and we partnered with the Forest Preserve District. So we started working in some of the forest preserves, but we needed also to partner with other area managers, land holdings that are really more intermixed with people to try and get a better feeling for how coyotes were expanding their range into our neighborhoods. And so Spring Valley became an incredibly important partner. So I owe a lot to the managers and the people there. So, well, in fact, one of the maps, one of the animals I'll profile in this presentation, uh, Spring Valley was an important part of her territory for over a decade. So we'll talk about her. So we've been doing this project for a couple of decades. We're heading into our 25th year, and I think it was Carrie felt like it was time to actually publish something that would be of note to the public and try to share some of the things that we've learned about these animals. And we've tried to do that in a variety of other ways, such as a website and presentations, that type of thing. But a book that kind of, I guess, captured most of what we were learning from these animals would be a good time for that. And so that was the motivation behind it. And so the goal of the book is to share stories, share the stories of the coyotes that we've learned from through both words as well as pictures. And so fortunately, Carrie is an incredibly accomplished journalist and editor, and so the book benefits from his expertise. And the pictures and the images in the book are are many of them are contributed by Corey Arnold. I'll just quickly share the first one. This was the picture that he was really trying to get. This is one of our animals 1285 on the Chicago River, and formed the basis for a story in National Geographic. And so many of Corey's images are in the book. And in fact, that image became in 1285 became an international star. So these are cover images from National Geographic and other countries. So, and that's kind of the impact of this project has gone well beyond Chicago, across the U.S., and then now it's international. And this is a picture of Corey Arnold actually doing his work. So this is him setting up a camera um, array. And this was the image that he got as he was doing that. That was on the west central part of Chicago. So anyway, I just want to give a shout out to him, and I'll be referring to some of the images throughout this presentation. Carrie, you want to talk just a little bit about how our relationship with coyotes started?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Stan. Now, I think if I were to sum up people's attitudes toward coyotes is pretty simple. The coyote gets a bum rap. And I think it all began in 1872 when Mark Twain published his memoir, Roughing It. And you can see some of the quotes he has in it. He is always hungry, so homely, so scrawny and ribby and coarse-haired and pitiful. When he sees you, he lifts his lip and lets a flash of his teeth out, and then turns a little bit out of the course he was pursuing, depresses his head a little bit, and runs away until he's out of easy pistol range. Um, at the time this was written, most Americans had not seen coyotes. Their native habitat is the American Southwest. And part of their amazing story is how they have now gotten into 49 states, all of Central America. And if I had to bet, they're in South America now, having crossed the Darien Gap. Um, they are, so far as I know, and Dr. Garrett can confirm or slap me upside the head, I think they're the only mammalian predator that has consistently expanded its range throughout throughout history, despite efforts towards extirpation. You know, we virtually wiped out the cougar, we virtually wiped out the jaguar in North America, we virtually wiped out the wolf in most areas. Coyote survives, coyote expands, coyote keeps going. And it's a remarkable species for that. And most of the things you read about them aren't um, aren't truly based in fact. Um, and then the second great public image of the coyote came along about maybe 80 years after. Um, yeah, Wile E. Coyote, super genius, and the hapless foil of the Roadrunner. I think one of my favorite cartoons, but I think we can all agree that Wile E. Coyote was not the best representative of the species. So these are the pop culture, if you will, references to coyotes. And as Stan will show, and I think by the end of this presentation, you'll agree, the coyote is really worthy of our respect and admiration. They are an incredibly adaptive species. They are an incredibly admirable species. And although I don't like to project human traits on animals, there's some pretty remarkable traits among uh, coyotes that will make you reconsider just how mean and dirty they are. So,
Yeah, and actually, there's a link here. The Mark Twain's essay was actually the the stimulus for Chuck Jones' um,
yes.
creation of Wile E. Coyote. So that's where that image come. I mean, his caricature. That's Mark Twain's essay formed the basis for that. So, and then if you can just compare that caricature versus the real thing. So this is one of our handsome guys over on the. This is someone on the north side of Chicago, and you can tell that there's quite a big difference between the real thing versus the cartoon. Um, so just as a little bit of background, so as Carrie already mentioned, in terms of their distribution across North America, he mentioned that this is mainly in the Southwest or the prairie states, historically, and then this map actually doesn't do it justice. So this is their was their current distribution a little while ago, but now it's even greater. Now it also includes Newfoundland and Nova Scotia up in the Northeast, basically all the way to the Arctic Circle, and then down to the south, as Carrie mentioned, across the Panama Canal. Um, One of the reasons for its success is that it has a wide, what we call a dietary niche, because they are able to exploit a wide range of foods. Their preferred prey would be the small rodents, but they will take advantage of larger prey, such as in this case, this is white-tailed deer. This is actually on the lake ice over by Fermi Lab, and this is an alpha pair that actually learned to push deer out on the ice. And what they would try to do is get the perfectly healthy deer to fall down. And once they fall down on the ice, then the coyotes, even two coyotes, can take a full grown buck. So they can use the environment to their advantage to expand that niche. And in fact, work that I did up in Nova Scotia a few years ago showed that we actually were able to document that they were hunting moose and actually taking down moose that were between 700 and 900 pounds. But that's with the right environment and the right conditions for it. But the main thing that they're doing here in the Chicago area is actually, what they do out on the prairie, which is hunting rodents, and they're very good at it. To illustrate this is an animal over by medieval times, so just, down the road from Spring Valley. And I want you to notice, I'm going to show you this film clip. This is obviously snow. It's undisturbed snow. The animal is listening for voles underneath the snow. And this will be illustrate just how keen their senses are and how good they are at mousing. So notice that there's no disturbance in the snow. So and it can pick out a vole. Just by, in this case, it's hearing, but obviously it can also use their sense of smell. And this is what they're doing especially along the tollway. We see them hunting voles quite a bit. So with their expansion, not only did they increase their range, but they also increased the kinds of habitats that they moved into within their range, and that would include the last remaining habitat across different parts of North America, and that would be the urban metropolitan areas such as Chicago. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we began the study back in 2000 to understand how coyotes were basically exploiting the Chicagoland region, but also to understand how they're relating to us, what kind of risks they pose to us, both in terms of physical risks as well as other things such as risk to our pets, and then disease transmission. Over the years, we've maintained some objectives for long-term monitoring and to understand dynamics over a long period, but then we've also added new objectives as the population has changed and we have changed along with it. So just I'm not going to be able to touch on all of these things, but here's some of the subject areas that we've been covering and trying to learn over the years. So the population dynamics, we're still studying that. We're still trying to understand after 20 plus years, what are the things that regulate coyote populations and what limits them? Their space use, especially their territories and their habitat use in relation to us. How do they use space in relation to how we're using that same space? Host parasite dynamics, so what kind of diseases they may be spreading. Their diet is an incredibly important part of their ecology, and it's also important for management. It also plays a very important role in terms of conflicts with us. So we have been focused on diet from the very beginning, and that still is the case today. Their social structure, even though coyotes have been studied quite a bit out west, we weren't sure that they would be able to have or maintain the same kind of social structure in the city that they do out in the west. So we were curious about that, and I'll be talking about that in just a few minutes because it's so important in terms of how they live in this environment. Their ecological role is something that we've focused on more in the latter years of the study. And what I mean by that is what kind of relationship do coyotes have with other wildlife in the Chicago region? Do they actually function as predators, or do they just simply eat human food? So, for example, in comparison, raccoons they're a notoriously successful urban animal, and they are notorious for thriving off of human food. In fact, human food kind of changes their whole behavior. The question is, do other animals such as coyotes do the same thing? We also look at their genetics, which I probably won't have time to touch on too much. More recent years, we've been looking at what we call behavioral syndromes, which is really their personalities. And that's kind of the hot topic area in the urban wildlife field right now. So how do we do this? So we actually capture coyotes, we radio collar them, we measure them, we collect samples from them. So that could be their blood samples for disease work or some of the genetic work, fecal samples also for disease work. And then of course we take them back and release them where we capture them. And this is one of the most challenging parts of the study. Imagine trying to capture coyotes without capturing people or their pets. It's really hard to do. So for example, here's a great image. This is actually coming from Jeff Nelson, a great picture of one of our animals captured in a trap. And in fact, it's a recapture. You may not be able to tell, but it has ear tags in its ears and it has a radio collar on. And that's one of our alpha males over in Crabtree. When we capture them, we take them out of the traps, we transfer them to a cage, we take them to the lab. We will collect our samples there, and then we take them back after we're done, and we release them always back where we capture them, hopefully it's in the same day. In fact, within hours of doing this. So this is one of our animals. This is actually coyote number one, the first animal we caught. And we're collecting samples. In fact, the technician on the far end over there, Ed, he's the one that drew the short straw. So he's collecting a fecal sample from the back end. But you'll notice that I'm holding the front end. So that's me asserting my dominance over my technicians, basically. Ear tagging, so we do ear tag them. We look at their teeth. That's actually one of the most important parts of their body. So coyotes can actually do without a leg. They might be able to do without a foot, their ears or something like that, but they can't do without their teeth. just like any other wild mammal. The teeth often determine the lifespan of the animal if there's nothing else out there killing them. And so the teeth are very, very important. We also use the teeth for aging the animals. This is an animal getting inspected by Abby, and then this is an animal about to be released. And that's an animal, one of our collared animals. That's over by Batavia, and so then we track them either physically, following them in trucks, and you may have seen some of our trucks with the antennas sticking off the top, especially over at Spring Valley. Again, Spring Valley was one of our core areas back in the early days of the study. It's amazing. Or we use GPS collars now with satellites, and I'll show you some of that in just a second. We also go into the dens, as I mentioned. We're doing that. This is our first week of doing it. We try to do it the first week of May each year. So coyotes only produce one litter a year. It's always this time. And and so we do that. We only go into a den one time for each pair of animals, and we do that to be able to get an idea of the litter size, because the size of the litter tells us a lot about the population dynamics of the population. And then we also draw a little bit of blood or hair samples from them for genetic work, because we are actually testing the idea of how monogamous are these animals, what is their mating system, and what's their social structure. And that's been a fascinating part of the research. So this is one of our natal dens. This looks like a very natural setting, um, like you would see in any kind of magazine. But if you turn the camera to the side, you see that it's actually in a subdivision. And I believe that was over in Schaumburg. So just down the road, some distance from Spring Valley. This is your standard 4-week-old pup. So this is about where the offspring are at right now. So the animals that we just got, the den that we were in yesterday, this is about their age. So they're usually born about mid-April, and then mid-May is when they hit their 4-week period. And we measure them, as I mentioned, and then we collect samples from them. And this is the litter that we got yesterday morning.
Oh,
And this is a fascinating litter. This is you won't fully be able to appreciate it, but this is a litter of 5 animals, came from Poplar Creek Forest Preserve up in the northwest corner of the Forest Preserve, where that's been our core area as well. And this litter is coming from coyote number 923. Now, when I refer to a number, that's the actual sequential number of the coyotes that we've captured in radio collared. So she was the number 923rd coyote that we caught during the course of the study. We caught, so this is the litter of the female 923. 923 was captured. We captured her and collared her. Actually, we captured her also as a young pup from the natal den, just like this, 10 years ago. So back in 2015. So that's how it started with her. She actually never dispersed from from her natal territory. She inherited the natal territory from her parents. And this litter, uh, is only a few yards away from the original den that she was born in a decade earlier. This just happened yesterday. So, anyway, so that's the kind of things. This project has been going on long enough, and we've been able to follow these animals long enough that we can tell these kinds of stories. And I'll tell you a story about, an animal that was living in Spring Valley here I didn't know that you'd be meeting in Spring Valley today, so this is by coincidence. But anyway, this is the kind of information we're getting from this study now. So we've marked almost up to almost 1,700 animals so far, and that includes I think we're closer to about 800 pups at the moment. And over the years, as far as I know, we've only caught 2 dogs and 2 people. So that's a pretty good record. We're pretty happy about that. And that was in the early years. So
I
we've done
should,
better.
yeah, I should add, it is not easy to trap a coyote. The fact that Stan has a picture of one that's been captured twice is especially astonishing because they are so sensitive to change in their surroundings that they can tell a disturbance in the soil that has been created to plant a trap. Their feet will feel it and they will avoid the area. So they are really, really wary creatures.
They are. They're super hard, super
Yeah.
smart. They learn so quick. Um, so just real quick, so your standard coyote population in Schaumburg or anywhere else, even out in the wild, is going to consist of your resident animals. So those are the animals that are territorial family groups. So they have the alpha pair, those are the parents, and then they have the offspring of either just that year or the current year and possibly even the year before. So for example, that coyote 923 that I mentioned, um, I said that she stayed in her natal area. She stayed with her parents for the first 2 years and she did not become sexually mature. She delayed her maturity until her parents were gone. And then she assumed the alpha status. So those are your territorial animals. And then you have transients that are floating around that landscape that are non-territorial. They're both males and females that have left their birthplaces and they're looking for their own territories. So the transients are actually very important, even though they're hard to study and because of they cover such large areas, which I'll show you in just a second. And then we have dispersers.
Yes.
Then we also have dispersers that leave permanently. They leave the whole Chicago area, or they'll leave one part of Chicago to move to another, and they'll never be back again. So the pack sizes are typically, I say here 2 to 8 individuals. The average would be closer to about 4 to 5. The 8 is a lot, and the largest pack size we've ever documented was 10, but that did not last very long. So they split up, and the offspring start getting kicked out by their parents once they get to be that numerous. Our territory sizes average, if it's a natural area like Spring Valley or most of the northwest suburbs, their territory sizes are 2 square miles or smaller. Once we move into the city, and I'll show you some of the home ranges of the animals or the territories closer to the downtown area, they expand. They have to cover a larger area because there's less green space. Um, That's 466. I won't have time to talk about him, but his territory was Crabtree. I just want to show you what it looks like. What does a coyote territory actually look like? So these red dots and these yellow dots represent his satellite locations over the course of a year. And the red dots are nighttime locations and the yellow dots are daytime. But the main thing is that you can see that his territory is very well defined. The edges are pretty hard edges, and he's using all of his territory. So he's using the whole square yardage, and that's pretty typical. And that's, of course, within a forest preserve. That's one big green space, and that's what it looks like across the different large parks or forest preserves that we have across Chicago. Um, this is Poplar Creek. Each one of those colors represents a different pack. The dots represent the locations or the radio locations of the alpha animal. That would be the alpha male or the alpha female over the course of um, a year. And so you can see that even within one forest preserve, in this case, you're looking at 7 packs. So we typically have between 7 and 8 packs that are territorial and they use exclusive areas within Poplar Creek. That's a tremendous density. So again, each one of those colors represents that group, and that probably represents 4 to 5 individuals at a minimum. If you move outside of the forest preserves and you actually move into the developed areas, you see coyotes changing their space use to avoid us, and so they have to concentrate their locations within whatever green spaces are available to them. So across the area between Bussey Woods and Poplar Creek, we had 3 packs maintaining territories, and in fact, one of these is in purple was using Spring Valley Nature Center. And then this is what it looks like. Just so you have all of these territories. Each one of these blue polygons represents a territory of a family group. And then on top of those very well-defined, fairly small territories, you have solitary animals. And so those yellow polygons represent the home ranges of those transients that are floating across that landscape. And every time there's a vacancy in one of those territories, a transient slides right in and takes their place. This is one of the reasons, and there are others, but one of the main reasons why you often hear that you cannot permanently remove coyotes from an area because they will fill a vacuum. And it's because of these transients. And so these animals that are living these territories in the subdivisions or in the communities are changing their behavior to be able to avoid us. So this is footage from a documentary of our animals. So this is an animal that was on the south side of Schaumburg back in the day. And they have to become nocturnal. So they're out at night and they do avoid people as much as possible. And in this case, this coyote's attracted to cat food that's left on the front porch, and you have to see the cat watching the coyote eat its food. And you'll notice that there's people walking, and this coyote, this was, I believe, 544. She was so good at hiding from people. So she would go to great efforts to avoid them. So those people that are walking within a few yards of that animal, and they never saw her. And then, as I think most of you know, coyotes do maintain these territories just like wolves through a variety of strategies. So they scent mark, so the alpha animals preferentially urinate and defecate along their perimeter, their territories. They do this constantly. And then, of course, there's the howling that everyone knows about. So the howling actually is an important advertisement to to the neighbors that this territory is occupied. And when they hear their neighbors vocalizing, often coyotes will respond back to them. So that's a really important communication within the pack as well as between packs. And then rarely do they actually attack each other or injure each other. So, I mean, it does happen to some degree, but it's actually a fascinating thing. We assumed that as the population grew and as the densities got higher and higher, we thought that there would be some type of overt kind of conflict where coyotes would begin killing coyotes. Wolves are the biggest threat to wolves. So in Yellowstone, where they're protected from hunting and trapping, the leading cause of death for wolves in a natural setting are other wolves because of that territorial defense. So it would be just a natural hypothesis to say, well, maybe coyotes would do the same thing. But we have yet to document a single case of a coyote killing another coyote or a group of coyotes killing another coyote. That doesn't mean that they're not aggressive to each other, and we have definitely documented them pushing them out or chasing them out of the space or out of their territory, but they don't kill them.
I should add that one of the common myths. Oh, Stan, I think you're about to hit it. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so
Yes.
one of the questions, Stan and I have done this presentation for a number of groups. Stan has been doing presentations on his research a lot longer than I've been lucky enough to join him. But one of the questions we always get is, are coyotes celebrating a kill when they howl at night? And no, it's not about that. It's, as Stan said, it's about communicating to members of their pack and to other members of the pack about locations and such. And if you think about it logically, if a howl were the celebration of a meal, then that would be an invitation for an open buffet for all the coyotes in the area. So it's really a warning sign and a locator system to say, here I am, stay away from me.
Yep. It's also it has a dual function that's also really important for family bonding. So it repels neighbors, but it maintains bonds of the family. And I love this picture. So this is in the book. I begged Debbie DiCarlo is a photographer over in Ohio, and she took this picture. This isn't a staged photo. It's just an amazing picture, and it illustrates the family bonds and especially a lot of the communication and teaching that goes on between parents and offspring. And I don't have time to go into all of the howling. We have actually done some research where we actually experimented. We went around, I had a grad student go around the country to captive groups of coyotes and recorded their howls so that we would know like how many individuals were howling at certain times. And then we would do playback experiments with coyotes here in Chicago in the territories of our collared animals, including over in Spring Valley, and watch the response to the playbacks. And so what we were able to find is that they do count. So they do know the difference between a lot of coyotes howling versus only a few. And there's other things that other people have discovered, especially over in Yellowstone, which is that there's a hierarchy among the coyotes within their pack, and that is expressed in their howling bouts. So howling is almost always started by the alphas, and then the pups join in. So that's usually what you're hearing, and what you'll be hearing a lot over the next couple months. So I mentioned that they have a single litter a year. This is the most important time of the year for them. So there's two times that are important. So February is when they mate. So mating is pretty darn important. And they're only primed for mating during that period of the year. Outside of February and March, their hormone levels are so low that both the males and the females cannot be reproductive. So it's just during that one period. But the most important time is right now when they're trying to raise a litter. So raising a litter is a very stressful period. It's also a period where we can have conflicts with them, and it's because of the proximity of the den and the litters. Litter size does vary quite a bit. So this is one of our litters. That's 11 sitting in that came from that den.
Wow.
All of our genetic work has shown that our Chicago coyotes are extremely monogamous. So far, we have not we have gone through 17 years of genetic testing of the litters, and we have not documented a single case of cheating going on with our alpha animals, even though they have plenty of opportunities to cheat, but they don't do that, which makes them unique among the dog world. So wolves cheat, foxes are horrible cheaters or great cheaters, depending on your perspective. Um, and Ethiopian wolves, other foxes like bat-eared foxes, they are fairly low. So they used to be considered like the most monogamous until we published the work on the coyotes, and they're the most monogamous. And over the years, because their survival is so high, and because we've been so fortunate to be able to do this work over so many years, I can also say that so far we haven't documented a divorce. So an alpha pair truly mates for life. This is one of Corey's great pictures of our animals at night. This is one of our alpha pairs, and often you will see a coyote. In some cases, you'll see one of them, but you may not see the second one. But if it's an alpha pair, what's really interesting is that even though they only mate during a very narrow window of time in February, they stay together as a pair year round. And in fact, theoretically, they're not really supposed to do that. Other monogamous mammals typically don't do that, but unless they're mating multiple times. But these animals stay together all the time. But you may not see them So in this case, for example, you see one coyote quite obvious in the front, but there's only that one slight image of the pair or the mate in the background. One question is, why would they be monogamous? Why wouldn't they mate with multiple individuals? And one of the advantages of monogamy is that both both parents, or both mates are involved in the parenting of the litter. So the male is just as involved at raising the young as the female, which allows her to produce a greater number of young successfully. So, like for example, this litter of 11 all came from a single mother and a single father, and they're able to do that. Whereas other mammals that are not monogamous generally have smaller litters. And then just real quick, so this is your animal. So this is coyote number one. She started off the project. She was the first animal we caught over in Bussey Woods, but she was not a resident of Bussey. She was actually one of those transients moving through. She was a young yearling animal in March of 2000. So she was coyote number one. Fascinating animal. I don't have time to go through her whole story, but she also ended up being one of the animals that we tracked the longest. So we actually ended up tracking her for over a decade. This is us recapturing her in 2004 as an alpha female, about to have a litter. She had just mated that month. And then I recaptured her again in 2010. This is me holding her, taking her from the trap site. And so that's an animal that was about to turn 11 years old. And she spent her whole time living in the Spring Valley, Schaumburg area. That was her territory, her and her mate. Um, so this is her without the duct tape around her mouth. And that's the last time we caught her before she did end up dying of natural causes. She had kidney failure, which is really rare to see in coyotes. It's very odd to have coyotes dying from natural causes. But that's what we see for some of our animals, especially the really amazing animals like her. She moved through the streets of Schaumburg every single night, was never hit by a car, raised at least 8 litters without a conflict with anyone in Schaumburg. This is her mate, Melonhead, coyote number 115. Sorry. And so a handsome boy, and I told you they mate for life. He was the animal the only male she ever mated with. So again, we went into the dens. We genetically tested all their offspring. These are her locations, and so I believe you're looking at where you're meeting tonight. So that would be, so those pink dots are her locations during the last year of her life. And you can see she was using Spring Valley and also the Schaumburg Golf Course quite a bit. And these are the locations of Coyote 115, her mate, before she died. So you can see they were right on top of each other. So the great example of a few lessons here. So one, very good at crossing these roads, crossed Meacham all the time. Roselle rode every single night, never hit by a car. And they also did not ever lose their fear of people. So again, living in this area for 10 years, you would think that, well, at some point they would lose their fear of people and then become a conflict or a nuisance animal, but they never really lost their fear. So that was in the suburbs. As we move into the city, this is what we've been doing in the most recent years. And it may be hard to see this image on a screen, but this is Chicago. So the city of Chicago, that's Navy Pier, toward the right. And those little tiny dots, those are the GPS locations of coyotes that we captured in the city and different parts of the city. And I've here are the home range boundaries to kind of help illustrate. Each of those are alpha animals, and those are packs. So the one little gap there would be Navy Pier and the loop. And coyotes are using Navy Pier coyotes are using the North Island. It's hard for us to get GPS locations on the animals in there because when they go into the loop, they lose their satellite reception. So there's coyotes down there. It's just hard to document that. But this is what we see in the city, which is quite a bit different, much larger territories. And the way that they're using their territories is quite a bit different. They're having to use very long linear avenues. This is one of our coyotes. It's I think 1108 or something like that. This is in the book. This is another amazing image from Corey Arnold. This image actually won an International Wildlife Photography Award. Again, moving at night on using the rail lines. So in this case, they can avoid the traffic by moving above the roads. Another picture of that animal using the rail lines. And this is just a closer view of some of the animals on the south side of Chicago along Lakeshore Drive, as well as the canal. And you can see the linear aspects of their movements. So they're using our travel lanes just like we do to get from one place to another. This is 748. I mentioned him in the book. So he's off of the animal living off Lakeshore Drive. Fascinating animal, alpha male, very, very strong parenting instincts. And he and his mate actually had a litter. You'll see Soldier Field up there in the middle of near one of those clusters. That's where they had one of their litters. And in fact, this is a picture, I believe this is in the book. I actually took this picture. This is on top of the parking garage across the street from Soldier Field. And he's tending a litter. So the litter, you see trees there. That's still the top of the parking garage. It's just that they made it's green architecture. So there's a double layer of asphalt with soil in between and trees planted there. Well, in the areas where the trees are planted, that also provides an opportunity for coyotes to den. So they could actually den in between those levels of the asphalt or the cement, concrete, I should say. And so that's what he's doing. He's tending a litter on top of the parking garage across from Soldier Field. So, another image from down on the river. This is 1285. And so I like this image for a couple reasons. Mainly the no trespassing sign up above the coyote. So it's a good reminder of even down near the city, there are places where people are restricted to be. And often that's a great refuge for a coyote. So, and then even that parking garage I showed you earlier, that was out of season. That was during the spring when you don't have people using that full garage. So they actually close off the upper levels. So it actually gave a nice, secure area for the coyotes to raise their litter. In terms of roads, so these are the satellite locations of one of our most urban coyotes, 744. And I'm sorry, I'm missing one of our 400 animals. I can't remember her name, but anyway, that's the loop, that's Navy Pier, and she was using that area, and just to illustrate their ability to cross roads. So again, she had to be nocturnal, so her activities are at night, and they have to use the same streets that are and sidewalks that we use. And so this is going to be a few images or video clips. Hopefully you can see this. Hopefully you can see a video clip of this animal using a sidewalk. She's going to cross a road. This is a residential road off of Lakeshore Drive. And so this is not too impressive because there's not much traffic. And so she'll move right in front of us and pretty much ignore us for the most part. But she's going to cross a much busier road coming up. So this is going to be right off of Lakeshore Drive, a constant flow of traffic. And watch her as she approaches it. So here she's crossing the road. She's going to move over to the sidewalk on the other side. You can see the traffic that's coming, that's moving across there. She's going to cross that road. In this case, she's looking at the oncoming traffic, and then she darts across because she saw a gap immediately and she didn't hesitate. She knew that in that particular stretch of road, she would have to take advantage of a gap. Now, just a few minutes later, or I think more like a couple of hours later, this is going to be the same coyote, same night, crossing a road that has lights, street lights. So I'm going to start the clip. You're going to see a cyclist coming by. He's staring at us in a truck because of the big antenna we have sticking off the top that we're using to track the animals. But behind him is this coyote, and she's standing on the corner watching and waiting for the traffic to stop at the light. So now behind him, this is her. She had been standing there and she waited until the traffic stopped so she could take her time going across. So the same coyote, same night, using different strategies to cross different roads.
And was that 441?
Yes, thank you. Yep, 441. And she lived down there for 5 years before we lost her signal. So very good at what she did. So coming back to this animal, so again, this is that shot from at the river, just to give you an idea of what we know about these animals because of the length of the study. So this animal, I can tell you how he ended up in this location to have this picture taken. So the question might be like, where did this animal come from? Well, we know where he came from. So these are his locations. Those red dots represent his locations as we captured and radio collared him and then followed him. So you'll see up at the top there, there's a big cluster of locations. Again, Navy Pier would be farther down. But this is one of the cemeteries on the north side of Chicago. And you'll notice the big cluster there. He was born there, so that's where his natal territory was. But he became um, sexually mature and had to leave. And so a little bit later that winter, he made the move out of his natal territory. And so he moved briefly into another cemetery to the north, but then he moved to the west quickly. And you'll notice a big separation in the dots. That represents a lot of movement. So he's moving pretty quickly. Notice how linear the movement is. He's using rail lines, or he's using our own travel lanes to move. And so he actually moved south. So again, he moved at first to the west, then he moved south, and then he took a left and he moved back to the city, bit on the south side. And that represents about 19 miles through the Chicago region to end up at the Chicago River where the picture was taken. So that's how he got there. And we know that, again, he's originally born in a cemetery on the north side of Chicago. This is current. So this is actually happening today, like right now. So this is a different kind of dispersal. So you'll notice down in the far right-hand corner, that's Schaumburg. This is an animal that was GPS collared. We collared him a couple of months ago in Poplar Creek Forest Preserve. And then just a couple of weeks ago, he began making his move. And this is what we call a dispersal. It's a permanent move out of the Chicago region. And so he is on his way now. So as of uh, yesterday, he made his way all the way up into Madison, Wisconsin. And that's where he is right now as we speak. He just arrived there. So he just arrived in Madison. Let me see. So this is where he is in Madison as of uh, May 5th. So, and I know that for a fact he was also there on May 6th and May 7th. So he's on the edge of this lake in the city of Madison. So that's again some of the other information that we get from our collared animals. I want to point out that through 2022, only about 4% of the coyotes that we've radio collared and tracked have eventually become nuisances. And I'm using a very broad general term of nuisance. In other words, it's what people complained about, or an animal that generated complaints, they may not have done anything other than just become maybe too obvious, or maybe didn't show the right kind of behavior around people. That would be enough to be considered a nuisance. So it's relatively rare. Most of the coyotes go through their lives living among us without coming into any conflict with us. But we do have a small percentage that do, a very small percentage. And so the goal of the research and other things that we're doing is to make sure, first of all, to monitor and see if that percentage changes over time, but also to try and understand of that small percentage, why did they become nuisances? Which leads me to this. So this is also in the book. So yeah, so this is a dog wearing a predator protection jacket. Um, and this is the time of year when we do see a bit of a spike in potential conflicts between coyotes and dogs. And that is, it does have a lot to do with the litters. So when they have a litter in a den in the ground, they don't like to use dens out in other times of the year. Coyotes don't like to go into a hole in the ground, but they have to have this litter. It makes them vulnerable, and they become defensive. And a coyote that would not normally be aggressive at all of a sudden now becomes aggressive. And so a lot of it is trying to get people aware that there are coyotes with litters on the ground, and so this is the time when you may not want to let your dog run off leash and that type of thing. And then, of course, there's feeding. And this is also an image from Corey Arnold. It's not the National Geographic photographer. It's not nearly as sexy as his other pictures, but it's one I actually asked him to take because this is like one of the most important pictures because feeding continues to go on. There's still people intentionally feeding coyotes, and there's a lot of people that are unintentionally feeding coyotes. And we do know that in those few cases where coyotes have lost their fear of people or became habituated to people, often it was preceded by food. So this is a continuing kind of challenge as far as trying to moderate the conflicts. So that's leads me to the other question. A lot of people just want to get rid of them. They say, well, what good are they? Why do we have to put up with them? The first answer is that you don't really have a choice because we haven't been able to ever exterminate coyotes on a permanent level in any sense. But this takes me to the last thing I'll talk about, which is what are some of the positive aspects of having coyotes in this landscape, and something we're still working on. But some of the things that we've been able to focus on, thankfully, the funding agencies were allowed us to kind of broaden our objectives a little bit. By pure accident, we discovered that coyotes were a major predator on Canada goose nests. And that actually is important because the goose population often, and especially in these metropolitan areas, are no longer migratory and they can become an overpopulated population. So what we found in monitoring almost 2,000 nests was that almost half of all the nests were taken by coyotes. Coyotes are the only predators that can actually take eggs from a goose nest that's being defended by adult geese. And this is because adult geese can't, if they try to defend the nest from a coyote, the coyote just kills the geese. And the geese actually understand this. And so coyotes are basically providing a very important service there. One of the other things that we've been focused on over the last 7 to 8 years is looking at fawn survival. So white-tailed deer is another animal that tends to become overabundant in parts of the Chicagoland area and are also a management challenge because of a lack of predators and predation. And so we know that coyotes don't take that many adult deer. It's rare. I gave you a rare example at the beginning of this talk, but where they can exert an influence on the deer population is with fawn predation. But we weren't sure that they would actually do that if they're being subsidized with human food and that type of thing. So the question is, are they actually going to act like a predator and take deer fawns? And the answer so far has been absolutely yes. So we've been focused over in Poplar Creek down the road from where you're meeting tonight, and we have been um, basically radio collaring fawns. We'll be doing that at the end of this month, in early part of June, in documenting the survival of fawns. This is a standard kind of wildlife type project. Here's a doe radio collar that we use to find her and then find her fawn. This is her fawn, and what we found is that coyote predation is the number one cause of mortality of these fawns by far, but it all takes place in the first 3 weeks of life. And so if the fawn and the doe can get her fawn past the third or fourth week of age following birth, they have an almost 100% survival rate. In fact, deer in general in these urban areas have a very high survival rate. Um, so it's important to have that coyote predation on the front end because it helps to moderate some of that population growth. And then I haven't talked about their diet, but we've used a variety of techniques to do this. This is actually the old school stomach content analysis. So this is the result. This is a content of a single coyote stomach. Those are 9 rodents in the stomach. What we've found using a variety of techniques is that these coyotes, the majority of them are still functioning as predators on rodents, even in the city. And they're not taking city rats, but they're finding native rodents to still hunt and eat, even in many different parts of the Chicago region. And this was an image that I wanted to put in the book, but I think the publishers wisely decided, no, this is probably not the best picture. Um, so this is this is the record for the greatest number of rodents taken from a coyote stomach during our study. There's 21 rodents taken from a single coyote stomach here, just to give you an idea of just the amount of hunting and stuff that they do out there. And then very quickly, this is the last thing. So we did do a feral cat or outdoor cat study. So this is actually a shelter that was created in one of the forest preserves where we set up test colonies of outdoor cats. And what we found was that coyotes were a predator on cats. We assumed that it would be much higher than it was. It was actually relatively low. Only about 7 to 10% of the cats were ever taken by coyotes. But that was partly because the cats, and these are truly feral cats, these are truly outdoor, 100% all the time outdoor cats. They know where the coyotes are and they avoid where coyotes are. And in fact, coyotes were basically serving as this big buffer for green spaces that kept cats out without actually killing them. Cats avoided green spaces, which of course help save a number of native species from cat predation. So they are performing services out there. We're still learning about those. It's hard to document coyote effects on other wildlife, but everywhere we look, they're usually having some type of a beneficial effect that's poorly documented. This project over the years has benefited from the hard work and effort of many different people, including the partnership with the Spring Valley Nature Center. Shay McKenzie has been our research associate for now almost a decade or over a decade, as well as a countless number of wildlife technicians that have come through our program. And with that, Carrie, do you have any other things that I've missed I didn't mention?
Well, I always one of the another popular question we get, so I'll tackle it before we turn it to questions is it coyote or coyote? And I say coyote because Stan says coyote, but really it's a geographic thing. People in the West and in rural areas tend to say coyote. People in urban areas say coyote. I think that might be another Chuck Jones influence, perhaps. But either is correct, and the root comes from Native American language, coyote. So call them what you want to call them, and and they are, as you have seen from Stan's presentation, they're absolutely amazing animals.
So hopefully I didn't go too long. I kind of lost track of my time, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I know Carrie is happy to answer questions if there are any people still there.
Mostly everybody's still here. Tom's got a question.
Yes, Stan, I know your study is mostly the urban coyotes, and you said that coyotes are predating geese. Now they're ground nesters. What have you run across any data about coyotes predating other ground nesting birds, nightjars, turkeys, things like that?
Yeah, so there's been actually quite a bit of research, obviously not mine. I actually do some coyote research outside of the city. So we have a project going on in rural Ohio right now, which is more livestock based, and we worked on coyotes up in Nova Scotia as well. But there's been some really nice work on the turkeys. There's a lot of concern about turkey populations. And so the coyote originally was blamed for a lot of that as a predator on their nest. Same thing is true for quail, some other game birds. It turns out that they're actually not an important predator of them. There's other predators that are more important, raccoons being probably the the most common thing. But they kind of get the blame for that. But that doesn't mean that they don't take the occasional nest. What's interesting is that a nice contrast between the city versus rural environment is that, I mentioned that in the city, they've definitely keyed in on goose nests and they know exactly what they're doing with the goose nests. And there's actually some fascinating things that we learned about that I can't spend all night talking about it. It's one of the best parts of the study, actually. But if you go out into the Midwestern prairies, the prairie pothole region where waterfowl nesting is so important, out in that environment, they found this is decades ago, almost from the very beginning, they found that coyotes are actually responsible for higher levels of nesting success in waterfowl because they limit the amount of predation on waterfowl nests by limiting the other predators that are a bigger predator on waterfowl nests than coyotes are. And how does that work? One of the biggest predators would be red foxes out there, skunks, some other smaller mammals. Coyotes actually exclude them from their territories, and because the coyote territories are so much larger than, say, fox territories, it actually reduces the amount of predator pressure on waterfowl nests. So it's a complete reversal of what we see in the city.
And I would add that a lot of people who like to think they're protecting game birds, in particular by shooting coyotes. If you have coyotes in your midst, to go back to among you, that's because you're in coyote habitat. And they regulate their populations pretty well by governing the size of their litters, depending to conditions. If a coyote is lethally removed, two things have to take place in order for it to have any effect on subsequent populations. A, it needs to be a mating alpha, so you could shoot six of the eight animals in a pack, and you would still have the two alive that were breeding. So they would continue to breed and might have more pups. And if you should happen to take out an alpha, it will be replaced relatively quickly. So I'm not saying that there are no coyotes that need to be removed lethally. If they become bold around people, they almost certainly have to be taken out. But the people who see them as this pestilence, you can't get rid of them. We would have gotten rid of them already if we could have, right? Not Stan and me, but mankind. We've been trying to get rid of mammalian predators since Europeans came on this continent.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, really, it's two questions, but I'm going to try to pretend that it's one. They're related to each other. And so, the causes of mortality in coyotes, Chris Anker has talked to us about coyotes a few times, and the last time was, oh man, I don't remember how many years ago. It was sometime before the pandemic, so it's been a while. But I remember him talking about heartworm and saying that most coyotes had heartworm. And so the average lifespan was something like 3 or 4 years, which I thought was astonishing. And I mean, the ones that you talked about were living longer than that. So one thing is, any comment that you have about what Chris told us back whenever the heck it was that he told us that. And so then related, if you're having between 3 and 17 pups every year, either the population is growing really, really fast, or most of them are dying of something or another. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, what keeps the population in check?
Yeah, so you're right. So those are two questions. They're related. I mean, so it's not too bad. So the first one, so I'll take the second one first because that's an easy one. That's a great question, by the way. So I mentioned early that we're still looking at, or we're still trying to understand like what regulates the population. So what we do know that at least in the Chicagoland area, um, there are no mortality factors that are high enough to regulate the population. So there are no diseases that they have that occur at a high enough level to regulate the population. Um, the biggest cause of death is are vehicles every year, consistently from year to year, and that's not occurring at a high enough level to limit the population. So the question is, what's limiting it? Well, for the first 10 years or so, it was a growing population. So it was growing very fast. Now it's a pretty stable population. So the question is, well, why is it stable? And what it looks like now is that there is another option. So it's not about mortality necessarily. There's another way to lose your population or to lose the excess, and that's dispersal. And so that's what we're looking at now, is how many animals are actually leaving the population. There's another thing that they do, and coyotes can slow their own growth. So coyotes are also, they don't do this consciously, but they can reduce or lower their reproductive rate. Many of the offspring, it looks like, and I gave you an example of one, are staying with their parents longer because they don't want to disperse because there's no vacancies out there. So many of them are staying longer, which means that they are delaying their sexual maturity. And so that's a big part of the population class that's actually not becoming they're not reproducing very much. Only a very small percentage.
Right. Stan, is it fair to say that a significant number of coyotes never reproduce because they're killed before they leave the pack, because they're killed as transients, moving from one part of their pack's territory to find their own, etc. It's not as if every animal out there is reproducing, and as Stan alluded to, it comes down to carrying capacity of the landscape. There's only so much food to go around, even in urban Chicago.
Right. So, yeah, most of them aren't actually reproducing. And when he mentioned that the average, so it's all the lifespan is always a tricky question to answer because if he's talking about the average lifespan is probably around 3 years. And that's because those younger animals, those transients that leave, they do have a higher mortality rate than the rest of the population. So it's not high enough to necessarily lower the population or limit it, but it does slow the growth quite a bit. So we're losing some of those individuals before they reproduce at all. And then, of course, the territorial nature of their social structure. So they only allow so many coyotes to live in an area, as opposed to, say, deer, or raccoons or skunks or geese or other animals that aren't territorial and they can congregate in large numbers Coyotes don't do that. You will never see coyotes doing that. So that's where the dispersal and the forcing animals out after a period is an important regulatory mechanism. And it has been seen in wolves when they aren't hunted and trapped, eventually it becomes an internal, like their own regulatory mechanism that limits their population growth. So that's what we think is going on. As far as as far as heartworm goes, he's partly right. So we do know this. So we do a lot of work with heartworm, and what we know is that about 40% of the coyotes are infected with heartworm. So almost half, not quite, at any one time. If you just randomly select individuals, about 40%, that is actually a super high number. So if you go into rural Illinois, especially at this northern latitude, at the northern part of the state, that percentage is closer to 3 to 4%. So outside of the city, outside of the Chicago metro area, 3 to 4% are carrying heartworm, whereas 40 some percent, like 44% or so, are carrying heartworm in the Chicago area. So that's one of the costs of living in the city. Now, how that happens is an interesting topic of argument right now, but it's clearly happening. Part of that is age related. So even though I say the average lifespan is closer to 3 because of the early mortalities, once they get past that, their survival rate is quite high. And that's where we have our older animals. And that's what distinguishes the urban population from the rural population. So the rural population is getting hammered with hunting and trapping to the point where their annual survival as an adult is about 30%. Our annual survival for adults in Chicago is over 60%, closer to 70% for females. So we're more than double. It becomes even more dramatic when you get to the pup class, the animals that are less than a year old. In rural Illinois, the survival rate of that juvenile class is only around 15%. That's because they get hunted. And especially in the fall, when they're leaving their territories for the first time, they're super vulnerable to hunting and trapping. And so they only have a 15% survival rate for 1 year. Whereas our pups in Chicago have the same survival rate as the adults do, about 65%. So that pup class, that's the big class. 65, they have a 65% chance of surviving their first year as opposed to 15% chance of surviving in the country. That's massive. And that's one reason why this population in Chicago grew so fast, filled up all of the vacancies. They're still trying to carve out little nooks and crannies. We see it with our within the forest preserves especially, but even in the neighborhoods, temporarily, two animals may try to get together and start their own territory in between two existing ones, and it will only last for a few months, and then there's just not enough space for them. So it's completely pretty much saturated across here. So they either die or they have to leave. So dispersal, I think the dispersal rate is probably much higher now than it was back then. But that's actually, we're literally doing the analysis on that right now. So actually this month, we finally have enough data where on dispersers where we can start actually evaluating that. Is that the reason why the population isn't growing anymore?
Yeah, okay, to speak up, Laura.
You're tracking a lot of data, Doctor, and are you seeing anything that shows diseases traveling to coyotes or that zoonotic data that goes from animals into people? Is there anything like that yet that you can track?
Okay, so zoonotic. So yeah, so we collect blood for serology for a variety, we screen for a variety of different things. Most of them are not zoonotic in the sense that coyotes are the carriers. They may be indicators of a zoonotic. So for example, Lyme disease. So we'll screen for them for something like that, but they're not the reason why people are getting Lyme disease necessarily. Um, we always test for some distemper, parvo, which don't affect people, but they affect our pets. So we do monitor that. And I actually assumed when we began this study 20 some years ago, I assumed distemper or parvo would be the limiting factor. There would be a disease that's going to limit them. It turns out that it may play a role, but we haven't seen it much. There's almost no mortality from those diseases, even though they're all positive to them.
Probably the most damaging disease for the coyote is sarcoptic mange. Wouldn't you say, Stan?
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. So we monitor for mange. That's the most common disease that can be transmitted across coyotes, and it is, a lot of people don't realize it is zoonotic. So people can get sarcoptic mange. Definitely our pets can get it. And that is also a fascinating disease. I thought that would be another candidate for regulating their population because that's how it works in the country. So sarcoptic mange, that's a mite that burrows into their skin. They lose their hair from scratching. They also become susceptible to other diseases because their immune system is compromised when they have a heavy mite infection. So it can be very devastating for coyotes and other canids. And in the country, it does work as a regulating mechanism. So it's a density dependent disease. As the coyote population grows, it gets to a certain level, and then it's easier for the mange to spread among each other, and it kills them, and then it drops the population back down. What's happened in Chicago is not that. So they definitely there's sarcoptic mange in the population. We saw our first cases, I think, in 2003, 2004. I thought, oh, we're gonna have an outbreak and it's just gonna knock their numbers down. But it turns out that it's become not epizootic, but it's enzootic. So it's just a regular feature of the coyote population now. So in a normal year, about 15% of the coyotes, possibly up to 20% in a bad year, would be infected with mange, but it never gets above that. And some of them, quite a few of them actually survive it and then become immune to it. So it's a disease, it's the most important disease that in terms of mortality for them, but even that isn't at a high enough level to actually regulate their numbers. And theoretically they could spread that to pets and to people, but it's actually really hard to do that. So it's not much of a threat to people. So they're not in terms of disease transmission so far, and it could change, but so far we have not found any zoonotic pathogens to be concerned about with coyotes. I mean, I should amend that. So there are some parasites that they carry in their intestinal tract that are also zoonotic, Echinococcus being one of that can be potentially lethal to people. But again, as long as you're not picking up their feces and consuming them, you're not too much to be worried about. So that's probably the worst thing that they're carrying out there, and yet it's very difficult for a person to succumb to that or to get infected with that.
Right. And, you would think that mange is especially deadly in northern climates because they do lose their hair, making them more susceptible. The mange itself might not kill them, but the exposure would. But as Stan said, we're just not seeing evidence of breakouts that materially affect the population in the urban areas.
hmm We do have hot spots occasionally. So Spring Valley was a place that did have a hot spot of mange in the coyotes temporarily, and it was like that for a year or two, and then you have either those animals survive it or they get replaced by other coyotes, and so it goes away. And but it'll reappear at some point, and you'll get a flare up, and then it'll disappear again.
There's a number of people in the audience here tonight who are restoration volunteers of Poplar Creek. And from that map that we quickly looked at, it looked like they were on the east side of 59, mostly, all those red dots. Is that true? And has the restoration on the west side of 59 and going down, has that had any influence on the Coyotes or whatever?
Right. So they're in Poplar on on the west side of 59.
That's the restoration area.
Yeah.
But is that where, are there coyotes there? It sort of looked like the red dots. Maybe I was reading the map wrong. Where
No,
are red dots?
right. For that, I just picked a year at random. And that year we didn't have an animal radio collared over on that side, but there's coyotes there for sure. And in fact, we've got coyotes radio collared there right now. On that side. So they were there before your restoration, and they're there now. I'm sure that they probably enjoy your restoration. So there's probably some positive benefits for them. Um, but it doesn't
Well,
affect their movements or anything like that.
I think it's fair to say that if you live in the Chicago area, there are coyotes within a quarter mile of you, no matter where you are. Period. You know, because as you saw from Stan's presentation, they can live at the parking lot of Soldier Field. They can live that, you know, they can live almost anywhere. So if you see a place, you know, a popular place for them in the city are cemeteries. That's great coyote habitat. If you think there might be there, they're there.
Yeah, and they're not just restricted to to Poplar Creek either. I mean, as far as that area. So for that map, I just picked a particular year and just threw up the animals that were collared at that moment. And I only showed you what was in Poplar Creek. There's also animals outside of Poplar Creek, like in Streamwood on the south side. We have one right now. In fact, we tried to find their den yesterday and failed, but they're in the neighborhoods around Poplar Creek, in addition to using every square inch of Poplar Creek.
I
So,
live
I mean, they're everywhere
I
around it.
live in Barrington. There's one in my backyard because I see the remains of his or her kills in the morning sometimes when I go out with my dog. I've never seen the coyote, but I guarantee you there's one there.
Does anyone on Zoom have a question?
Well, and it's funny you should say, a question on Zoom from Nat and John. Can we join or assist the next time Stan is out at Poplar Creek?
Uh, I wish. I wish you could. We could definitely use some help, especially trying to find dens in Poplar Creek. It's the hardest thing ever. Um, so but don't um we appreciate the offer and the interest. It's hard for us to accommodate volunteers. It's just hard logistically to do that. And then of course there's the whole issue of the Forest Preserve District and what they do or don't want people doing in the Forest Preserve. But I don't know. I mean, it would be nice to be able to have people join us on things like that. It's just hard to do.
And the more people who are there, you lower the likelihood of actually seeing a coyote because they do not want to be around us.
Yeah, so we've actually had to limit. So it did get a little bit out of control going into dens with for a while the Forest Preserve District was kind of allowing some people to go with us that were administrators or some press people or that type of thing, because it's a good PR move for them. The problem though is that the more people you have, you start potentially impacting how the coyotes respond to us going around those areas, around their dens and that type of thing. So it's a fine line. So the more people that could help would increase our ability to find the dens, but then we have more people around their dens.
Right. And typically when we dig out the dens, the parents, they're close by. They're not in the dens, but they are close by and watching and observing everything that our researchers do. So the more people who are there, the more likelihood that they'll get really anxious with bad effects for the litter.
Great. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, Dr. Stan Geert, and is it Carrie Luft, like the German word for air?
Well, you pronounce it correctly, but during World War II, my ancestors had a survival technique, and we Americanized it to Luft.
Carrie Luft. Yeah, everyone doing well.
But I answer to both. You got it right, actually.
And give themselves a round of applause. We had a high mark. We have 38 still between Zoom and in the room here. We had a high water mark of 40, so it was a great turnout for the last one of the season. And don't forget June. So everyone give themselves an applause.
Yeah.
Well, thank everyone. I mean, thank you for coming. And again, I feel bad. If I had known you were at Spring Valley, I would have tried to be there because that, as I mentioned, that place and the people there have been so important. So I showed you Coyote number one. That was her home. I mean, it was amazing, and it still is. So I so much appreciate the partnership with the Nature Center.
Yeah. I'm really sorry that it didn't occur to us to let you know about this. We could have taken you out to dinner. I mean, you don't
Well,
apologize.
we're still around.
Right.
What?
No. I mean, I'm sorry. We just got the invitation to the Zoom call, and of course, we're happy to accommodate that. But yeah, maybe some other time, Stan and I could visit you in person.
For sure. Yeah, we would be happy to drop by sometime.
What about the book? Is the book available?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes. Well,
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to get the URL, and for some reason, Bing is not actually finding anything. I don't know, Jim.
The easiest way to get the book is just to go on Amazon.
Oh,
You know, it's there. Just type in Stan's name and Coyotes, and it'll pop up. And you can get it wherever books are sold. If they don't have it on the shelves, they can order it for you because it is in general circulation. So we don't have the Urban Coyote Project's website, which, in case you want to look at that, is urbancoyoteresearch.com. And there's a link on that to help you buy the book as well, either through bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, or Amazon.
Or
Right.
have libraries get it.
Yeah.
We love libraries, but we love multiple buys even more. The proceeds do not go to Stan and me; they go to McGraw's conservation efforts. Just to be clear, but yeah, ask libraries to buy it too. We get the sales reports. I'm actually very, very pleased at the number of libraries that have purchased this book.
Yep.
But it's all right to say Wile E. Coyote, right? Because it kind of rhymes. So thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.